All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. I'm Jay Croucher here as always with Drew Dinsick in his new preferred location of boat for the second day in a row as he continues to chase Cam Akers all around California, going from training camp to training camp. Good to see you, Drew. Good to see your background as well. Today we're going to talk about the NFC Championship market, teams that we're happy to fade and back in that market. And then after talking about the women's side of the US Open yesterday, we're going to talk about the men's side of the bracket, which is a bit more of a closed market, I would say, than the women's side, but we'll get into that. But let's start off with the NFC Championship market. The Philadelphia Eagles, your NFC winner last year, they're plus 260, the team they beat in the title game. The Niners are 4-1, Cowboys plus 650, Lions plus 850, 12-1 teams in the Saints and Seahawks. And then you get into the longer shots. So let's start this off, Drew, by talking about who we're happy to fade in this market. Does any team leap out to you?
I think there are three, and it's all price-based. And it's all kind of the way that I think the season is realistically going to unfold. The first team to talk about is the Eagles, obviously. And while, yes, their schedule starts out soft enough that it's possible that price will get shorter before it gets longer, their stretch in November, December, to me, can only really bring them back to the pack and really opens up the door for the Cowboys, as we've talked about. So Eagles, for me, at that price are a fade in the NFC. And I think, perfectly prepared to change my tune once we get to the playoffs, when we get a sense of health, when we get a sense of path, because I think the Eagles offense is one of the best in the NFL, if not the best, based on how deep that wide receiver room is and how good that offensive line is. They're going to score points in bunches this year, but to win the Super Bowl, I think is a little bit high. What were they last year? 50-1, and it's basically a little bit less talented, a year of experience at the quarterback position. That's kind of the only difference. You've lost some coordinators, so realistic to expect the Eagles may stumble out of the gate as they try to integrate new personnel, as they try to integrate the new coordinators there. So Eagles are a fade for me. Niners are a fade for me out of the gate because I need to see a healthy Brock Purdy do what he did in December and January last year before I believe that this should be that significant of a price to win the Super Bowl or the NFC. This is a lot weaker held opinion. I think the Niners are the most talented roster in the NFL, top to bottom. They're clearly the most talented defense, as far as I can tell you, because they have, Hall of Fame players at every level. Well, maybe not in the secondary, but they have Hall of Fame linebacker, Hall of Fame defensive linemen, and very, very talented safety group and corners that I believe will take a step forward this year. So Niners are for real, but I don't believe that price is as good as you're going to see. I think there's a realistic chance that this team is around 500 as we get to Halloween. And at that point, then you're looking at a buy on the Niners. So fading that price. The Cowboys look fair to me, which really only leaves the last big four, Jay, the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions are going to get, I think, exposed. Week one, banner night against the Chiefs. That defense, to me, has huge weaknesses. They're going to be in a race to 30 in almost every game that they're in against a live offense. They'll definitely beat up on some of the teams on that schedule, but out of the gate, starting with the Chiefs is a disaster, in my opinion, for this Lions team. So I think realistically that price can only get longer as well. So I really think the entire top of the board, besides the Cowboys, is worth at least taking a stand against those prices because, again, in the case of the Eagles, and end of the regular season as we go into the playoffs will be the buy point for me. At the case of the Niners, we're talking Halloween, and in the case of the Lions, we're talking never. Not because I don't believe in them getting to the playoffs, but because I think that defense is ultimately going to unwind them once they play some of the elite teams in the NFC on their way to try to get to the Super Bowl. So I don't think realistically I'm ever going to have a Lions position this year, and I think it's a wait for a better price on Eagles and Niners. Does all that make sense?
Yeah, I think the Lions are a strange team because I think everyone accepts that they are a good team, but they also don't really have much of a secondary. They don't have a pass rush, and they don't have a top 12 quarterback. And so you add all that up, and it's like, well, how do we get to them being a really, really good team. I mean, they have an excellent offensive line. They have Amon-Ra, St. Brown. They have the idea of Jameson Williams, who's hurt again. Stat about Jameson Williams. Last year, do you know how many passes he caught, Drew? He caught one pass. He had one reception last year. He played in 6 games, caught one ball, had a lot of targets. Just that one catch that he did make was a 41-yard touchdown, which I think sticks in the minds of most people. But, I mean, he's going to miss the first chunk of the season. And also, there's a little bit of Rashad Bateman, Kadarius Toney about Jameson Williams, where it's like, can you stay healthy? Can you play a few preseason games? You can't even do that at the moment. So, yeah, with the Lions, just question their upside with that defense and with Jared Goff at quarterback, who presumably at some point may have to go outdoors for a playoff game. With the Eagles, I agree, plus 260, no interest there. I just think as a general rule, if you're like even money to lose your division, you can't be plus 260 to win a conference for the most part. And then the Niners at plus 400, I think there is scope to be able to watch them at first and see what they look like, see what their quarterback position looks like before jumping in. I don't think that's going to get too much shorter over the course of the first month or so of the season. So of the top teams, particularly the top 4 favorites, the only team I'd have any interest in backing would be Dallas at plus 650 to win the NFC. And there's still some 16-1 about the Cowboys to win the Super Bowl. I think that is a better bet than plus 650 NFC. But we'll talk about the long shots. But in terms of the number 1 seed market as well, just quickly, you got the Eagles favorite there, plus 325, then 49ers, Cowboys, Saints. Is there anyone in that market that you're particularly keen to back?
I've looked really hard at Falcons here at that price, but I really was hoping we were going to see something more like 20-1 there. I believe in the Falcons a lot more than most of the other people in the market. For whatever reason, I don't understand why people aren't looking at the defense on paper. People should be looking at the defense on paper and kind of seeing what I see, which is a top 10 unit potentially. And, with the uniqueness of that offensive scheme, and just in general, a very, very soft schedule, I think 1 seed for the Falcons is not out of the realm of possibility. I can't honestly make a case for any of the NFC North teams. I think those defenses all have enough questions that, whoever comes out of the NFC North is probably going to be your 4 seed. And then, with the Eagles Eagles and Cowboys, I think you made the key point. Only one of those teams can win the NFC East. And we think it's closer to a coin flip than the market. So by definition, the Cowboys are valued, the Eagles are not. Even saying that, I think you're talking about NFC East winner and 49ers as a coin flip in terms of the NFC, practically makes up, in my mind, something in the ballpark of 90% of the win probability for this particular market. And last year, it was pretty straightforward to look at the likes of the Packers, the Bucks, and the Rams and say, these are all flawed favorites. And there's going to be chaos, and this conference is weak. And that was all, relatively straightforward. And taking swings on the Eagles, which was a swing and a hit last year, as they were, I believe, in the 10-1 range for this market, maybe even as high as 20-1 at one point. I did not get the best of that number there, but I did have a nice ticket on Eagles last year. And to me, I think ultimately the cream will rise because I do see Eagles, Niners, and Cowboys as clearly the best teams in the NFC, with a gap between them and the rest of the field. So it's just a matter of, kind of timing your entry correctly, getting a best price in that market on Niners once we get to, get through the portion of the season where they've reintegrated Brock Purdy. And, if you want to take a number now on the Cowboys, I like that just as much as I like Cowboys, defensive player of the year number for Micah Parsons, because I think, again, realistically, the Eagles' schedule is so much more difficult. And really, if you just win those 2 head-to-heads, you're almost certainly going to win the NFC East, in my opinion. And then you can take a little bit of the uncertainty about what Mike McCarthy is going to do in end-of-game situations against elite competition in an NFC Championship game out of the picture.
Yeah, I think the way to think about the 1 seed markets just in general is to think about whether it's just better to back that team's coach for coach of the year or that team's quarterback for MVP, given the correlation on that front. And I think, for instance, like there's just no point backing the Falcons at 16-1 to get the 1 seed when you can back Arthur Smith, Coach of the Year, at a bigger price. Because if the Atlanta Falcons with Desmond Ridder get the 1 seed, then Arthur Smith is almost off the board to win Coach of the Year. And there's also plenty of scope for him to win as a 2 seed or a 3 seed as well. So I think that's the best way to conceive of it. And from that perspective, there's nothing really that leaps off the board outside of potentially the Cowboys price would be the
That's
only
an
one.
outstanding point, Jay. Outstanding point. And we haven't mentioned the Saints to this point in the podcast, even though they were in the mix there. At least the market considers them in the mix. Don't get it. The Cowboys, the Saints to me are like Lions light. They do have the potential to have an offense that can score into the 30s. But I really have huge questions about the way that this personnel is turning over. And I hate when teams are going into week 2 of training camp and signing veterans off the street to perform meaningful roles. Like that's just a bad way to do team building, and it's red flags all over the place for me. So Saints, for me, at least at the top of the NFC South market right now, are a fade as well.
Indeed. All right, before we get into some long shots to win the NFC, a reminder that with the NFL season quickly approaching, now is the perfect time to get your Roto World Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Get ready for your draft and stay one step ahead of your league during the preseason with updated player rankings, profiles, projections, mock drafts, and more. Go to NBCSports.com/draft guide and use code DRAFT2023 to save 20% at checkout. All right, so in terms of long shots to win the NFC, I'm pretty much drawing the line there as, so you got your big four if you want to call them that, of Eagles, 49ers, Cowboys, Lions, and then Saints and Seahawks at 12-1. So anyone outside of that, I think, is kind of a long shot. Vikings, 15-1. New York Giants, 22-1. Bears, Falcons, Packers, all 28-1. And then outside of that, you start to get into the realm of make-believe. I'm going to put forward the Chicago Bears as the best team of this lot at 28-1 in terms, at least, of upside to actually win the conference. And I think the reason for that is simply that Justin Fields has more upside than these other quarterbacks. And I think that offense has the scope. I don't think it's going to be the case, but that offense has the scope to be a top 5 unit. Just the offensive line now has been fortified for the first time in what feels like 20 years in Chicago, bringing in Nate Davis, drafting Darnell Wright as a top 10 pick. You have DJ Moore there now alongside Darnell Mooney, who I've always had a soft spot for, and Chase Claypool. And then Fields, I think, we know what he can do as a rusher. I don't understand entirely why his accuracy hasn't translated from college to the pros. I guess that's just an Ohio State thing in the system and the weapons there, but still think there's some upside in him as a passer. And the defense not quite as good, but I do think there's talent on the defense. They still need to upgrade cornerback and I think pass rusher, but there is a little bit of talent there. So I don't know. I don't think the Bears are going to win the NFC, but at 28-1, they would be the long shot that I would be most interested in. What do you think? Do you have a long shot?
I think we're entirely in the land of make-believe that a long shot could win the NFC personally. And the longest price that I would even give realistic consideration to would be the Vikings. And that's just because you at least have a quarterback who has playoff experience. Your Fields case is fine. Like, I get it. Like, he could have a Lamar Jackson type of season in 2019 where, he's face-meltingly, excellent offensive, piece of the puzzle. And the Bears are just an unbeatable team against a really soft schedule. Like, that could happen. I will be running to the window to bet against that team in the playoffs because just in general, the inexperience across that whole squad, starting at the quarterback position, is too tantalizing to not bet against. The same thing goes for Desmond Ridder and the Falcons. The same thing goes for Jordan Love and the Packers. Really, all the teams that I see with upside have inexperience at the quarterback position, except for Minnesota. And the fact that you have Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson and a very, very solid tackle and Christian Darrisaw. That's enough of a nucleus to expect that they could win road playoff games. I don't love a ton about that roster, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. But there's been plenty of years where defense has not mattered nearly as much as offense in the scheme of things. And if that is kind of one of the years we're living in the NFL this year, and just the you have this wash of inexperienced quarterbacks and offensive coordinators, but then you have year 2 of Kevin O'Connell and Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson together. That might be enough to give that consideration. Now, ultimately, I'm probably not going to back it at 15-1. It needs to be a better number because I just feel like they're drawing dead against the likes of the Eagles. They're drawing dead against the likes of the Niners, maybe even against the Cowboys. So I think this is the one market where you save your bullets, and if you want to get a bigger price, you shoot for it in the AFC.
Yeah, I think with the Vikings, it's just the talent on defense. I mean, that defense was deplorable last season. They didn't really make any meaningful upgrades unless the DC switch is going to cover up what is lacking there, particularly at corner, and really just the secondary in general. I don't understand why their offense wasn't even better last year. When you look at the talent, you get a full year of Hawkinson now. Maybe KJ Osborne takes a leap, Jordan Addison. But I agree that they are maybe a little bit underrated at the moment because they were a 13-4 team last year that probably played like a 8-9, 9-8 team. And I think they probably had a bit more talent than that. And they should have been a true kind of 10-7 type team. But yeah, they're one to watch. And they're probably not one to back now either because their first 7 weeks, they've got to play all of Philadelphia, Kansas City, and San Francisco. They've also got games in there against the Chargers at Chicago. So you can probably wait and see on the Vikings and hope that they start off 3-4 and potentially get out to a silly price and can make a run in what should be a pretty winnable division. All right, before we get to Carlos Alcaraz, Novak Djokovic, and friends, MLB Sunday leadoff heads to Texas this weekend, where the Seattle Mariners take on last year's World Series champions, the Houston Astros. Watch these two teams not only battle for position in the AL West, but for the postseason as well. Catch the action live this Sunday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Peacock. All right, well, the women's side of the US Open is, I think, much more wide open. On the men's side, we've got Carlos Alcaraz at plus 120, Novak Djokovic plus 150. So those two alone are taking up, 85% of the book. And then you've got Daniil Medvedev, your man Jannik Sinner, fresh off a loss as a minus 1,000 moneyline favorite. Stefanos Tsitsipas, Zverev, Rune, last year's finalist Casper Ruud, and co. Is there any way to attack this market at the moment with the current price?
I mean, realistically, you can grab that 85% and take 15, in my opinion, because there are only two people who I think are realistic potential winners here, and it is Alcaraz and Djokovic. I had at one point very high hopes for Rune being a threat here. I have a Rune ticket in my pocket that I basically would happily walk back and give back to the book right now and get my money back because he's completely on fumes. He's completely run out of gas. And all the other guys you mentioned, Medvedev, Sinner, Tsitsipas, Ruud, they all have fatal flaws in one way or the other, and or there's something about their game right now that is just not clicking. And so I think it's going to be one of these things where the men's U.S. Open is going to start on, what is it going to be, September 10th. Which is the first Sunday of the NFL, is basically going to be the U.S. Open final. And honestly, we get the rubber match between Alcaraz and Djokovic. I'm more excited for that particular tennis match than any match that we've seen all year. I was excited for match one at Roland Garros. I was even more excited for the Wimbledon Championship, in England in July, but this one is going to be even better. And the surface is perfectly neutral here. The situation is going to, presumably, Djokovic, if you didn't already know, is typically a fade at the U.S. Open because the conditions aren't ideal for him. And I'm not talking about court speed. I'm talking about simply. He's usually played more tennis than everyone else by this point in the season, and it's hot, it's humid. He doesn't always get the right conditions to in terms of preference and things like that, and so he's just a little bit out of sorts, and that has made it an opportunity to fade him at this particular venue. I hope that is the sentiment in the market, and I hope you get him at a dog price against Alcaraz in that final, because I think Djokovic ultimately is the play here. And realistically, I'm probably just taking the dog. Like, this should be a 50-50 match. This is a very even head-to-head. There's nothing about Alcaraz's game on hard court that's unsolvable for Djokovic, whereas he was more of an unknown on grass, which is why that made that a fun bet. So I think I'd lean right now Djokovic should be the favorite. He maybe is like 52 to Alcaraz's 48 or something like that. I think the fact that he has more bolts in the chamber this year than a lot of these other guys means something. And could be the differentiating factor. So Alcaraz, if he goes deep at Cincinnati, if he beats Djokovic in Cincinnati, that now maybe sets up the absolute widowmaker of a bet on Djokovic in the final, because you might get a pretty awesome price. So Cincinnati is going to have something to say about this, because we're probably going to get a preview of Djokovic Alcaraz at that tournament. I think sparing a tiny briefest bit of a second, one other bet I'm excited to make is if Alexander Zverev is not in Djokovic's quarter and he's not in Alcaraz's quarter, his quarter price I think is going to be a bet, because he's certainly finally finding some form, and I think could realistically be a semifinal competitor where he loses to one of the top two men on tour right now. So I'm still excited for this tournament. I'm excited to see all of the lead-up matches, and if anyone else can distinguish themselves. And there's going to be some surprises. There's going to be some long shots. Hopefully the U.S. men do better this year than they have in years past. Obviously, Tiafoe being the exception. This is the rubber match. This is what we've all been waiting for. Round 3 of Djokovic versus Alcaraz. And for me, give me the dog, and hopefully it's Djokovic, and hopefully it's in the plus 150 range.
Yeah, unfortunately, men's tennis has largely been reduced to searching for quarter prices, because the outrights now, there's just not a lot of meat on the bone. I hate to even say his name out loud, but the only guy who I think has really upside to disrupt this is Mr. Sinner. Just think back to that one tiebreak he played against Alcaraz last year, where he blasted him 7-0. I think he does have the game where, if everything breaks perfectly, he could beat one of these guys, but it seems pretty unlikely. But I do think he has the upside. But I don't think he just did win probably his biggest tournament, and maybe it build some confidence. But I don't think at the end of the day that Jannik is in that same sphere. All right, we are done. Don't forget to check out NBCSports.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thanks for those watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. Please rate and subscribe to us if you're listening in podcast form. And also a reminder to find all your favorite NBC Sports shows on Amazon Music. Just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports. From Jay Croucher and Drew Dinsick, we'll see you soon.